The following program is brought to you by the friends and partners of Andrew Wommack Ministries, celebrating 50 years of sharing God's unconditional love and grace.
The message that I heard really helped me out a tremendous amount. He blessed my life, you know what I mean? Just showing me what it means to believe God.
Welcome to Gospel Truth with Andrew Wommack, a teaching ministry that focuses on God's unconditional love and grace. And now, Andrew continues teaching from the life-changing Word of God about Don't Limit God.
Welcome to our Thursday's broadcast of the Gospel Truth. Today I'm nearing the end of my second week of teaching on Don't Limit God. This is something that God spoke to me supernaturally January the 31st, 2002, and I tell you, it just exploded on the inside of me that I was limiting what God could do through me. And since then, man, my whole life and ministry has transformed. And the good news is that this is not just for me, this is for all of us. I've been talking about this for nearly 2 weeks, and there's no way I can go back and share everything with you. But now I'm talking about some of the reasons why I was limiting God. It wasn't intentional. I wasn't doing it in rebellion. First of all, I was just at ease. As it says in Mark chapter 4, verse 19, the cares of this life. I was just enjoying being out from under pressure. Our ministry was in the best place it had ever been, and I was coasting. I was lazy. I didn't want to put myself out there and stretch myself and do all of these things. So that was one of the things that God spoke to me. I also had a fear of change. Let me probably rephrase that. Maybe not a fear of change, but a resistance to change. Most people don't like change. They don't like the unknown. They want everything to be planned. You know, my wife and I are different from each other. She's like an administrator, and she likes everything just planned out to the max. She will plan a vacation 2 years in advance. And I think she enjoys the planning more than she enjoys going. I'm just the opposite. I like to just go and do things spontaneously and stuff. But there are some people that my wife, she just does not like change. She would like every day to be the same for the rest of our life and stuff. Well, I'm not quite that bad, but I still don't like the unknown. There is a security and stuff. And so I think that there is just a natural resistance of us beginning to start dreaming big and saying, God, what do you want me to do? Because we like the security of having everything planned out. I've already talked about that. You know, another thing that was a fear with me was a fear of failure. And I think that most people can relate to what I'm saying, but there are people that would rather live a mediocre life and know that I can do this. I can handle this. It's no problem, rather than to stretch themselves and begin to step out with the potential of failure. I think that most of us have been taught to fear failure. We've seen people who fail be ridiculed and spoken down about and stuff, and we just hate the thought of failing, and because of it, there are many people that don't try anything that is beyond themselves because they don't want to fail. You know, Peter, the Lord said, He says, Peter, Satan has desired to have you that he might sift you as wheat, but I have prayed for you that your faith fail not. Most people would think that when Peter denied the Lord 3 times, denied even knowing Him, and swore with an oath, cursed himself if he wasn't telling the truth and stuff, they would think, well, he failed. But Jesus prayed for him that his faith wouldn't fail, and He says, and when you are converted, strengthen your brethren. And so, the point I'm making is, see, most people would say Peter failed, but Jesus prayed that he wouldn't fail and even prophesied that he would be converted and his faith would win out. He might have lost a battle, but he didn't lose the war. What I'm saying is that God doesn't look at failure the way that you and I do. You know, I believe that all of the things that God has put in my heart, I've got hundreds of millions of dollars that I'm going to be spending on a Bible college campus, and man, we just expanded our television into prime time, something that I have been praying for 17 years, and we are expanding in every area. I've already said this once on the programs last week, but the Lord has shown me that 2018 is going to be one of the biggest years that we've ever had in ministry. I'm expecting huge things. And you know what? I believe I'm going to accomplish everything that God puts in my heart. But let me just say that if I was to fail, and if these visions and if these things don't come to pass, you or someone else might look at me and think, well, he failed. But you know what? I think God would receive me into heaven and say, man, you went for it. You tried. You may not have hit the stars, but you hit the moon, and He would thank me for it. It's, you know, I used this example last week, but it's like a kid riding a bike. When you fall off a bike, your parent doesn't say, you idiot, why didn't you do what I told you to do? No, they get up and compliment you and say, hey, you went 10 feet, try it again. Next time you can go farther. I believe that even if I failed by your estimation, I believe that God would receive me into heaven and say, Andrew, you went for it. I was a person that was so introverted I couldn't look at a person in the face and talk to them. And yet when God called me to preach the Word, I battled through that. And I've battled through a lot of things. And you know what? Even if I don't obtain everything, I believe I am, but if somehow or another I didn't obtain it, I believe God would accept me. So, I say all of this to say that if you're afraid of failure, you're afraid to stretch yourself because you might be a failure, I believe the Lord looks at it. Not that if you try and go ahead and do what He told you to do and it doesn't work out, God doesn't see that as failure. You know what God sees as failure? Are the people that are just sitting there knowing that God has more for them, but you are afraid to step out. You're afraid to take a chance. You're going to play it safe. You don't want to risk anything. I believe that's failure. We need to redefine failure. There are some of you that you're thinking, man, I'm doing good, everything's okay, but you aren't content. You know that there's more. Everything that's in your life is stuff that you were able to do under your own strength and power. And I'm saying this in love, not to condemn you, but to stir you up and motivate you to believe God for more. That you know what? That attitude is failure. When you're afraid to do anything, that's failure. You know, let me use this example. This is one of my favorite examples from Scripture, but over in 2 Kings chapter 7, there was a famine in Samaria, and it got so bad that people were buying animal dung for huge amounts of money. Matter of fact, in the previous chapter, they had just killed their own children and eaten their children. I mean, they had killed all of the animals, and then now they were eating animal dung. They were turning to cannibalism. It was a terrible situation. And in 2 Kings chapter 7, verse 3, it says, and there were 4 leprous men at the entering in of the gate, and they said one to another, why sit we here until we die? If we say we will enter into the city, then the famine is in the city, and we shall die there. And if we sit here, we die. Also, now therefore come and let us fall out unto the host of the Syrians. If they save us alive, we shall live, and if they kill us, we shall but die. And the story goes on that when they went to the Syrian camp, the Lord had caused the Syrians to hear a sound like chariots and horses and a war sound, and the people fled in fear. They left their fires still going, their food was there, they left their coats, their clothes, their gold, everything, and they just fled. And so when these 4 leprous men got to the camp of the Syrians, instead of being killed, potentially killed by them, they went in and they had been starving, and now they had all of this food prepared, food that was still cooking. They ate until they couldn't eat anymore. And they took all of the raiments, they took all of the gold, they took silver, they went and buried some. They did all of this. They went from famine to feast. They went from being outcasts, leprous men that weren't even allowed in the city. They had to sit outside and they were just watching them starve to death. They went from being zeros to being heroes. In just a matter of hours, they went back and told the city of Samaria what had happened, and the king sent out, searched it, and all of a sudden the famine was over, and these guys who had been zeros were now heroes, and all because they said, how long are we going to sit here until we die? If we sit here, we're going to die. If we go into the city, if we go backwards, we're going to die. The only thing is to go forward, and there is a potential of death. They were going to go expose themselves to the enemy, and the enemy could have killed them. And that was a real possibility, but they said it's the only chance we got. If we sit here, we're going to die. If we go into the city, we're going to die. The only chance is to go expose ourselves to the Syrians, and if they kill us, we just die. We're going to die anyway. Do you know this is impeccable logic? If you looked at your options, and if you weren't emotionally involved and you were just thinking, what is the best chance of survival? This is absolutely the best chance of survival. They would die if they go into the city. They were going to die if they stood there. But if they went out there, they ran the risk of being killed, but it was the only chance they had of overcoming this. And I mean, it turned out to be a great deliverance. Did you know that there is a comparison here between this and what many of you are experiencing? You know that things aren't right. You're actually dying emotionally. You're watching, time go by. This is not a dress rehearsal. Every day that the sun comes up, you're either getting closer to what God has told you to do, or you're just burning daylight. You're wasting time. And you know things aren't going right, and you're losing heart. If you stay where you are, things are never going to change. If you turn and run the other direction, retreat, things aren't going to change. The only chance you've got to reach your full potential is to just take a leap, to take a step. Get out there and begin to trust God. Begin to say, God, what is your purpose for my life? And then as God shows you something, go for it. But there's so many people that are afraid of failure, they just won't do it. If these 4 leprous men had been so petrified by the possibility of them being killed, they wouldn't have ever done this, and they wouldn't have experienced their own supply, and they wouldn't have experienced God using them to literally break the famine and the siege of the city of Samaria. I'm telling you, you've got to overcome a fear of failure. I'm doing so many things right now. I'm not going to take the time to tell you, but I'm doing things right now that in the natural probably don't look smart. Let me just give you one thing that, I've mentioned this in the past, that over the last 5.5 to 6 years, we've spent $75 million on buildings, and we've done it debt-free. And this is on top of our normal operating expense, which is millions of dollars per month. And so we have been just stretched to the max. And then, man, I could go into more detail on this, but last year we had an additional 336 acres adjacent to our Bible College campus in Woodland Park that the owners came and made me a deal that I've talked to them before, and I said I'm not going to go in debt. And so anyway, they offered it to us debt-free. They said if you would just make payments like a lease payment, then there will be no interest. Every penny will go towards the purchase. No indebtedness. And they gave me a special clause that if something was to happen, like if I was to be killed in a plane crash or, worst case scenario, that we could just walk if we want. That probably wouldn't be the smart thing to do, but we could. We could just walk, and there's no obligation. I mean, it's as debt-free. It's like paying rent, and at the end of a certain period of time, you own the house. And so I did that. And because of that, it just stretched us to the max. And then in January of 2018 is when we actually took possession of this property and of this building, and there's a $1.5 million renovation that has to happen on this building before my staff from in the Colorado Springs can move up there. So I've got all of this building stuff, and I've got to have it finished this year. We're pushing to get it finished by the time the 2018-2019 school year starts, and to do that, I've got to put out extra money. We're putting out over $550,000 a month. I actually am going to have to be putting out over $1 million a month on construction. Then we've occupied this property, and I'm paying $133,333.33 a month on that. And then we've got a $1.5 million renovation on that building, and all of these things coming together. In December, I was sitting down and thinking, what can we cut? What can we cut back on? What can we push off into the future? We were trimming things back, and we were living as frugally as we possibly could. And at the end of December, I had something that I've been praying for 17 years come to pass. Ever since I went on television, I've wanted a prime time evening slot. And I'm on prime time on a couple of networks and a couple of individual stations, but they aren't the larger networks. And I am absolutely convinced that if I could get a prime time evening slot, that it would reach a brand new segment of people that don't listen. Most of my programming is in the morning. And like on the largest network I'm on it, I think it's, I'm not sure, but I think it's 5:30 in the morning Eastern time, and by the time you get over to the West Coast, it's like 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning or something. And so because of it, we haven't had the coverage that we need. And so for 17 years, I've been praying and asking for a prime time evening slot. And anyway, long story, but in the midst of all of this, where I've got all of these expenses going and I am stretched to the max, I feel like a rubber band that if you stretch me anymore, I'm going to pop. In the midst of that, I had the second largest network in the world come and offer me a prime time evening slot, 8 o'clock Eastern time in the evening. And as you step across America, you know, that comes to 5 o'clock in the evening on the West Coast. And I mean, it was just something I've been praying for, but it's going to add hundreds of thousands of dollars per month to my expenses. And you know what? In the natural, it looked like the worst thing to do. And so I told my media buyer and my staff, I said, look, give me some time to pray about this. My first reaction would have been just to say that, you know what, this is bad timing. My media buyer, even when he called me, he says, you probably aren't going to get an opportunity like this again, but he advised against it because of our financial situation. And I've actually had to have some of my vendors, you know, we paid them partial payments and split the payments for cash flow, which is not the way that we should be doing things. And so we were just stretched again to where it looked like we were going to pop if we did anything else. And so everything in the natural said, don't do it. And I told him, I said, well, I probably can't take advantage of it, but let me pray about it. I said I'd call him by the end of the day. And did you know I didn't spend more than just a few minutes praying about this, and the Lord reminded me, don't limit me. He brought me back to that, what He told me in January 2002. And He says, don't limit me. He says, you've been praying for this for 17 years. This is something you've been believing for. It's something that I believe God put in my heart, and it was like a one-time opportunity. And I was going to let it go because I was fearful that this was more than what we could handle. It would have been a fear of failure. And you know what? I didn't spend very many minutes praying about this until I thought, this is God, and I'm going to do it. And I don't have a clue. At the time I'm making these programs, I've only been on this evening time slot for 1 week. And I honestly don't know what the outcome of this is going to be. But I'm just telling you by faith that the money that it takes to get this done is going to come in. I am going to see it come to pass. God told me not to limit Him again. And see, this, I'm relating what happened to me, but this applies to you. There are some of you that you know God is telling you to do something more. You've got a vision in your heart to do something, and you have a fear of failure, a fear that is the provision going to be there, a fear of, can I do these things? And because of it, you're holding back and you're limiting God. Now again, there is wisdom to use. You know, it's not like I've never seen God supply a need. If God would have told me to do what I'm doing, like right now, we really have to have over $4 million a month to pay my bills. I need $5 or $6 million a month. That's what we need to accomplish everything I'm talking about right here. But you know what? If I had never seen God supply $5 for me, I think it would be foolish for me to just launch out and start obligating myself to a $5 or $6 million thing. I'm not talking about doing something foolishly. I've grown. I've seen God supply. I've seen God supply millions of dollars. And so what I'm doing right now is not foolish. It's not just, you know, a leap of faith. It's a calculated step of faith based on things that I've done in the past. So I'm not telling you to just throw caution to the wind and for you to go believe for a $5 million home and you can't even pay your rent. You know, things come in the good, the acceptable, the perfect will of God. First the blade, then the ear, and then the full corn in the ear is what it says in Mark chapter 4. There's wisdom to be used. Somebody could misunderstand what I'm saying, but hopefully you're understanding that I just know that God is speaking to some of you, and He's put things in your heart that you are afraid to take advantage of because of a fear of failure. And I'm saying to you, just like these 4 leprous men, how long are you going to sit there? Until you die. Are you just going to sit there? Are you going to let something that God put in your heart? You know, again, back to my situation, I prayed for 17 years. God, give me a prime time slot on one of these major networks. I've prayed for 17 years, and then boom, the opportunity comes up at what I consider to be the least opportune time, a very bad time to be expanding and doing that, but it's what I've been praying for, it's what I've been longing for, and now we get the opportunity, and I'm going to turn it down because in the natural it doesn't look good. That would have just been wrong. I just know in my heart, even though I'm making these programs prior to being able to tell you in hindsight what happened, I just know in my heart that this is going to work out, and not only are we going to have the money that it takes to pay for this programming and all of the increased employees and all of the increased materials that we send out and stuff, but I'm going to have excess. It's going to actually be a benefit to me. I'm saying this by faith, but I'm telling you this is what happened, and if you hang around, you can come check on us back in the summer of 2018, and I guarantee you, you'll see that I'm still on that prime time and things are working and God has worked it out. It'll work. And God is saying to some of you that there are things in your heart that you know God is leading you to do, and you're limiting God because of a fear of failure. You're afraid that things may not work out. You're afraid that God won't come through for you. I'm telling you, you're going to have to break beyond that. Fear limits God. Faith releases and appropriates what God has already done. And I just know in my heart that I'm speaking to people right now that God has put more on the inside of you than what you are experiencing. And you know what? You need to break out. You need to go beyond that fear. You need to trust God. And again, look at things from God's standpoint. Peter didn't fail, even though he denied the Lord 3 times. God didn't consider that a failure. He might have lost the battle, but he didn't lose the war, and he went out with a shout, and I guarantee you, I believe God told Peter, "Well done, you good and faithful servant." It is not a failure to attempt something, even if it doesn't work. At least you tried. There's a lot of people that are trying nothing because they're afraid, and they're thinking that, I just don't want to experience failure. I believe that that is failure. I believe that to do nothing. I believe that to keep your 1 little pound that God gave you and keep it laid up in a napkin and hidden, and then when He returns, you just give Him back what He had already given you and you didn't increase it, that's failure. You can read that in Luke chapter 19. I'm telling you, you need to break out of a fear of failure. And what I'm saying here is based on faith. People who operate in just the natural, if you go to a banker, they aren't going to give you anything on faith. They're going to look at your past performance and they're going to deal with you. And sad to say, most of your friends, even a lot of your Christian leaders, if you go to your pastor, he may sit there and evaluate you on what's happened in the past. But I'm telling you, in faith, you need to stretch out. You need to get over a fear of failure. And you need to go to believing God and taking the limits off God.